Good morning, homeschooling parents and kiddos who are excited about learning today. Today we are going to be doing Chapter 9 in A Child's History of the World. Chapter 9 is The Jews' Search for a Home. Ur is one of the shortest names I know. It is the name of a little place in that part of Babylonia called Chaldea. The first book of Moses says that a man known as Abraham was born there. Some people think he was born as early as 2000 BC. Others say he was born closer to 1800 BC. The Bible states that Abraham had a very large family, and though he had no money, he was rich. He had large herds of sheep and goats, and these were the chief riches in those days. Now Abraham believed in one God, while his neighbors, the Babylonians, worshipped many gods and the heavenly bodies, such as the sun, the moon, and the stars, as I have just said. Abraham did not agree with his neighbors for this reason. Hiccups. And his neighbors didn't agree with him either, for they thought his ideas were peculiar or even crazy. So Abraham took his large family, his flocks, and his herds and moved to a land called Canaan, far away near the Mediterranean Sea. Abraham lived to be a very old man. One of his grandsons, named Jacob, was also known by the name of Israel. And Jacob had a son named Joseph. Okay, next page. Jacob gave his favorite son, Joseph, a coat of many colors. Joseph's brothers were jealous of him, as children and even dogs are apt to be jealous of anyone who is liked better than they are. So they put Joseph into a well and then sold him as a slave to some Egyptians who were passing by. Then they told their father Jacob that Joseph had been killed by wild animals. The Egyptians took Joseph to far off Egypt, far away from Canaan. As I told you, it was very difficult for anyone to work his way up out of his class to a higher one. Nevertheless, Joseph was a slave in Egypt, and he was so bright that at last he became one of the rulers of Egypt. At that time, when he was a ruler, there came a famine in Canaan, and there was no food. In Egypt, however, there was plenty of food stored up. So Joseph's wicked brothers went down to Egypt to beg the rulers for bread. They probably thought by that time their brother was dead. They did not know that he had become such a great man and that he was now the ruler from whom they were begging food. You can imagine how surprised they were and how ashamed they must have felt when they found out that the great ruler was their own brother, whom they had planned to kill and then sold as a slave. Joseph might have let his brothers starve to death or put them in prison, or send them back to Canaan without anything, if he had wanted to. Instead of doing any of these things, he gave them not only all the food they wanted and more to take back home, but made them rich presents besides. Then he told them to go back and get the rest of the family and return with them to Egypt. And he promised to give them a piece of land called Goshen, where there would be no famine, and that they might live happily. They did as they were told, and Israel and his sons and all their family came down and settled in Goshen between 1500 and 1700 BC. The people who moved to Egypt were called Israelites, the children of Israel. These are the people we now call the Jews. After Joseph died, the king, or Pharaoh of Egypt, did not like these foreign people and treated them very badly, as other people have often treated the Jews badly since then. Though the Jews and their children and children's children lived in Egypt for about 400 years, they were enslaved by the Egyptians. Eventually, one of the Egyptian pharaohs became so concerned about the growing number of Jews that finally he gave orders to have every Jewish baby boy killed. In that way, he thought to control these people. One little Jewish boy, however, named Moses, was saved. And when he grew up, he became the greatest leader of his people. Moses wanted to get the Jews out of this hostile country where the people worshipped multiple gods. At last, he led the people of Israel out of Egypt across the Red Sea. This was called the Exodus. After the Jews had left Egypt, they first stopped at the foot of a mountain called Mount Sinai, while Moses went up to the top where he could be by himself and learn what God wanted him and the Jews to do. Moses spent 40 days praying on the top of the mountain. When he came down from the mountaintop, he brought with him 2 stone tablets on which God had written 10 fundamental laws for the Hebrews, laws which are today known as the 10 Commandments. But Moses had been gone so long that when he came back again to his people, he found them worshiping a golden calf, as the Egyptians had done. They had lived in Egypt until they had come to think it was all right to worship idols. Moses was very angry. It was high time, he thought, that they should get rid of the bad influence of their old Egyptian neighbors. At last, he succeeded in making them worship God again and gave them the 10 Commandments for their rules of life. So Moses is called a lawgiver and the first teacher of the Jewish religion. The Jews wandered from place to place for a great many years before Moses died, mostly because they were disobedient to God's law. Then Joshua, their new leader, led them into Canaan. Why didn't Moses lead them in, you ask? Well, Moses wasn't allowed to enter the promised land because when God had told Moses to speak to the rock to get water forth, he struck the rock, and because of that, he was not allowed to enter the promised land. He was allowed to see it, though. The Jews had no king. They were ruled by men and a woman called judges, but the judges lived very simply, just like everyone else, and not like kings in palaces with servants and fine robes and rich jewels. But the Jews thought it would be better to have a real king like their neighbors had. At last, a judge who was named Samuel said they should have a king, and Saul was chosen. Then Samuel poured olive oil over Saul's head. To us, this seems a strange thing to do, but it took the place of putting a crown on his head and was a sign that he was to be king. Samuel, therefore, was the last one of their judges, and Saul was their first king. All other nations at that time believed as the Egyptians and Chaldeans did in many different gods. The Jews alone believed in one God and lived by laws they believed God had given them. They had a holy book that contained these laws and recorded their early history. This book is also known as the Old Testament and has been made a part of the Christian Bible. Many Old Testament stories also appear in the Quran, the Muslims' holy book. This is the story of the Jews who gave us the Old Testament and the Ten Commandments. And here's the way they wandered. From Ur to Canaan, 1900 BC. From Canaan to Egypt, 1700 BC. From Egypt back to Canaan, 1300 BC. You can see that they finally settled down in Canaan, and then they called that land their home. Hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your homeschool week. Ta-ta for now.